Well, thanks for having us here today. Appreciate the opportunity to respond to the budget forecast. A lot of it's been said already. We still have a surplus, but there are some concerning signs. I think the cautionary tale makes some sense. A couple of the things that I noticed that I'm concerned about. First of all, the lower than expected wage growth and lower than expected employment is of concern. And a special concern is that if you look through the actual book, it shows that the numbers in Minnesota are worse than the U.S. Economy. So that's concerning. One of the results of that is that people paid less in income taxes, 95 million less in income taxes, because you have fewer people paying in. And I think we need to spend more time looking at that and getting to the bottom of what's causing that lag in Minnesota, even more of a lag than in the rest of the country. Is it uncertainty? Is it the business climate? We need to take a deeper look into those things and find out why we're lagging behind. An additional problem with that is the lower consumer spending. If you look at the numbers, 311 million down in sales tax. And to me, that says that people are nervous about our future. We provide a lot of uncertainty, and frankly, I think that we need to look at middle-class tax relief. They're not spending the money. They don't feel comfortable doing so, and that's why there's if you look through the report, business inventory, it's just the things aren't going off the shelves. People aren't paying taxes. So those are just kind of the two takeaways that I took from this, and I think that we need to look at what actually happened in the last session. And we spent, I think it was the second lowest increase in spending in 50 years. So if you look at the numbers, I think you can say that it's the decrease in spending, or the low increase in spending that we had in the last session that accounts for the fact that we're in as good of shape that we're in. And frankly, if we weren't there, if the House Republicans hadn't been there to provide balance and to hold the line on spending, we'd have been in a much worse situation than we are today. And I think if you go back and look at some of those tapes and some of the arguments we were making, we're very pleased with that we were able to make the inroads that we were to kind of quelch the spending that the Democrats were pushing for. And so going forward, we need to remain cautious in how we look at this, but we also have to consider those numbers that we've seen with unemployment and with the lower than expected wages, and what we can do to have an impact on growth in government in Minnesota, or excuse me, growth in the economy in Minnesota.
I think the message that we're hearing is that this is a forecast that says we're going to experience slow growth going forward, slow growth in the economy, slow growth in wages. I think that really should tell us we should be looking at slowing the growth and the expansion of government in Minnesota. Senator Bach has urged caution, as others on the other side of the aisle. I think that's appropriate. It's funny, though, that we urge caution in February, and in May, all the money's been spent. And I just want to make one thing clear. Providing tax relief to people in Minnesota is not spending state money. I know Senator Bach likes to talk about it as if it is, but it isn't. Let's just be realistic about it. That when we spend all kinds of money, like the governor wants to spend $1 billion to do universal pre-K. Now that's real spending. I just heard Senator Bach and others say we should be cautious. I think that's off the table from what I just heard. But that's real spending. But when you take that money that we have, that $1 billion, $900 million we have in the surplus, and do real tax relief, where does that money go? It goes back to the people in Minnesota, the businesses in Minnesota, to actually grow the economy. As we saw in the forecast, that's one thing we need. So that's what our agenda ought to be. That's our number one issue. Let's figure out how we can return the surplus that we have to the economy of the people of Minnesota. Let's get some real economic growth, and let's not commit to these long-term projects that we say are going to spur the economy. You know, I arrived here the same year that Governor Pawlenty was elected. I saw something recently that said that we have seen a 50% increase in the state spending budget in the years since Governor Pawlenty took office, which coincides with my first year. 50% growth in state spending. And meanwhile, the things that we say we're here to do is to alleviate poverty and make schools work. Those things haven't gotten better. Isn't the logical conclusion that we are trying to do things by spending state money and we're not seeing the result of it? maybe we ought to try the approach of let's get more of that money back into the economy, let the economy grow, let's deal with regulations, let's deal with the tax structure, let's create some real incentives for economic growth, creating jobs, and let this thing prosper, because it can. That's what I hope we do, and I'm looking forward to getting at it.
Two things I'd like to draw your attention to. First of all, following up on Majority Leader Pepin's comments about how we compare to the nation, if you look at this book, pages 66, 67, 68, you can see a whole bunch of statistics on how Minnesota is comparing with the United States. And frankly, we're not comparing very well. Our growth of personal income is slower than the rest of the United States on average. Our wage and salary increases are slower. Our employment growth is slower. You have to ask yourself, why is that? And I would submit that part of it is because of this state's tax and regulatory climate and some of the very large tax increases that we have seen over the last several years. It's no secret that this is one of the worst states in the country when you look at our tax climate, our business climate. And so pages 66, 67, 68, take a look and compare how we compare with the rest of the United States. We need to be doing things that help our job climate. We need to be doing things that help increase wages for middle-class Minnesotans, and just piling on more taxes and not looking at tax cuts for them when we've got a surplus is not what we should be doing. We should be looking at how we can get more money back to our Minnesotans. A second thing I would point out is another thing that was released today is what is called the debt capacity forecast, which says how much money we can bond for. And that's not in the book I just showed you, but you can get a hold of it. It's out today, and it shows that we have $968 million of debt capacity that we can bond for that's covered by our general tax sources. And you may remember the governor proposed a $1.4 billion bonding bill. So it'll be very interesting as we look forward to see how the difference is made up between the $1.4 billion the governor has proposed and the $968 million that the debt capacity forecast says we have in bonding capacity. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First thing I want to say is I was wrong with my prediction yesterday, so maybe I should get out of the prediction business. But you know what? I'm not going to stop being optimistic about the good things that are happening in Minnesota, and I think there is a lot to be optimistic about. But I think we need to take this as a sign that we need to change some things so that Minnesota can do better and can be more competitive. Some of the things that struck me in the report, frankly, I know they said that Minnesota's economy is strong and Minnesota's budget situation is strong, and that this is outside factors that are influencing the state. Unfortunately, when you read the report and dig into some of those tables in the back, you'll find that Minnesota's job growth and wage growth has been downgraded, and it has been downgraded about 50% more or sometimes double of what the national numbers have been downgraded. So what that tells you is the real losers in this report are Minnesotans who get up and go to work every day. And we need to figure out and put our priority on making sure that those people have an opportunity to do better. And unfortunately, I think it's pretty easy to see that in this forecast, the Democrats continuing double down on higher taxes and higher regulation is hurting Minnesota's economy, and it's hurting it far more than the national economy. And I think those are things that we really need to be concerned about. But we need to take this as a sign that now is the time to address those. Now is the time to fix those. We need to make Minnesota more competitive so that Minnesotans have an opportunity to do better than the national average. I think folks expect that from Minnesota. We do things pretty well here, don't we? I think people expect us to do better than the national average. But unfortunately, when Democrats controlled all of state government, it was continued tax increases and doubling down on higher regulatory environment for job creators. And we're seeing those chickens now come home to roost. And I really am. If you haven't looked up those numbers in the back, I think it's 67 and 68 in the back of that bigger briefing book. They are downgrading the real income numbers, the wage growth, the non-wage personal income, which is capital gains tax, total personal income, all of those are downgraded in the state of Minnesota much more than nationally. And I think those numbers are concerning. And Minnesotans that get up and go to work every day should really take note that the Democrats have not delivered and have not made this economy competitive and have not made this an environment and an economy where Minnesotans can succeed. And unfortunately, if we don't take note and change that now, we're going to be in trouble in the future. Also note that those that own farms and operate a farming operation, in 2017, they're projecting a 27.5% decrease in the income from farm operators. These are really concerning numbers. I am not as confident that things are going to automatically get better in the tails if we don't take action now. I think we've got an opportunity to do some things now before we actually head for a deficit. And we didn't make any tax changes in the last year, in the last budget. So what we did is we spent some more money. But we did not make any tax changes. So what we're seeing happening in Minnesota's economy is due to the changes that were made by Democrats when they had complete control of state government. And what they did is double down on making Minnesota less competitive. And we need to reverse that, and we need to do it now before we head for a deficit. I will also say that if Governor Dayton's budget had passed into law, we absolutely would be in a deficit situation today. So thankfully, Republicans were here, and I will tell you it was not easy to keep Democrats from spending every dime in the last session. But when we left regular session, we left $1 billion on the bottom line, and when we left special session, we left about $875 million in the bottom line. Had we not done that, had we let Democrats spend all of that money, we would be in a deficit situation right now. And I think that's the big lesson here today. So with that, we'll take questions.
Continue to press for tax cuts during this session, even though Democrats in the Senate say it's a non-starter and it doesn't work.
Well, I will remind you that Democrats in the Senate were saying that was a non-starter yesterday, so their position hasn't changed. And I understand that Tom Bach is a great negotiator and he loves to position for negotiating. But I think what we need to do is do what's right by Minnesotans. And then the numbers and data is pretty clear here that we've got an opportunity to change Minnesota's tax policy, make Minnesota more competitive, and invest back in Minnesotans. Instead of worrying about how much money we're taking out of their pockets, let's put some money back in their pockets. That's going to help this economy.
For tax cuts during this session.
Certainly.
Does the dropping number give you concerns about the scope of those tax cuts? I mean, you mentioned yesterday that you still felt that the Social Security income tax cut should absolutely be on the table this year, with a cost that's up to $600 million fully phased in. Does this change that view at all? No. I think investing in our seniors in the state of Minnesota is a very worthy thing to do. And I think the fact that we're charging state income tax on Social Security income is wrong policy, and it hurts Minnesota seniors. We're one of 7 states, I think, that does that. That's unfortunate. We've got an opportunity to change that, and I think we should.
Commissioner said that this makes a case for one-time spending, things like broadband, the governor's broadband, and not ongoing tax cuts.
Is anybody surprised that today the Democrats' plan is it's okay to spend this money, but we can't give any of it back to taxpayers? The reality is that last year we passed a fully funded state budget that had about a 5% increase in spending. We are collecting too much money from Minnesotans. That continues today. We have a projected $900 million surplus in this biennium. That means we're collecting almost $1 billion more money than the state needs. And I think the people who haven't seen a surplus in their budget are Minnesotans. Minnesotans who get up and go to work every day. And I think we owe it to them to invest back in them.
One-time spending, a better idea than ongoing, though. How about that specifically?
How about no spending?
Permanent tax cuts versus rebates or other one-time tax relief.
Ask your question again.
What are your thoughts on the relative virtues, given the size of this, of permanent tax cuts versus one-time rebates or other one-time tax relief?
Well, I think, if one-time tax relief stimulates the economy, long-term tax relief stimulates the economy more. And what's going on here is we've got some stagnation in the economy. It could use some stimulation. You got sales tax numbers down, income tax numbers down. That comes from the amount of money that it's directly affected by the amount of money that's in Minnesotans' pockets. So let's do what we can to make this state more competitive in its tax climate, more competitive in its regulatory environment, and let's put some real tax relief into the pockets of Minnesotans now and help them out. And that will help this economy, no question.
What does this do to the transportation funding debate?
Well, I still think we have an opportunity to do that. I think it's a priority for everyone. I'm still optimistic that we can get a transportation package done. Not sure exactly what that looks like, and we will certainly take a look at that. But if raising taxes 2 years ago hurt Minnesota's economy, which we learned today, raising taxes today will only further hurt it. And Minnesotans, they're the big losers in today's forecast. The revenue increases or the income increases for Minnesotans got seriously downgraded today, more so than the revenue for the state of Minnesota. The revenue projection for Minnesotans is a greater deficit. So I think we need to frankly focus on Minnesotans and not so much on the state of Minnesota.
Does this mean that there'd be less money available for transportation?
Not necessarily, but we'll certainly take a look. I noticed that the Democrats did not talk about raising taxes today. I think that's a good sign. The governor in this room at this podium in November declared that gas tax was dead. That's really good news for Minnesotans. Minnesotans do not need more money coming out of their own budgets. What would that do for the state's economy? Taking another $1 billion of tax increases out of Minnesotans' pockets, what would that do for them? It would only hurt Minnesota's economy more. This isn't rocket science, okay? We can see how we got here, and I think everybody's looking at the same numbers. So we've got an opportunity to right the course now, to turn Minnesota around. Let's start making Minnesota more competitive, and it's just shocking to see that the income numbers for Minnesotans have been downgraded at 50% more than what's happening nationally. So to say that this is all outside impacts affecting Minnesota is a bit disingenuous. Other questions?
Do you feel at all any, responsibility to not make too big of a deal about the numbers? And I mean, does it become a self-fulfilling prophecy if you hammer away at the message that things are bad?
It potentially can, I suppose, but that's why I started my message with, I'm still optimistic. And yeah, I was wrong on my prediction yesterday, but I think there's a lot of good things going for Minnesota. We have an unbelievably great workforce and a great work ethic here in Minnesota. Why are our unemployment numbers low? Because people, when they lost their jobs during the recession, went back to work and took a job at a lower income or at a lower skill level than what they were accustomed to. That's why our underemployment numbers are so high. Minnesotans went back to work. But what we haven't done and what Democrats haven't done is focused on helping out Minnesotans and creating an economy where everyone can be successful. Instead, we're trying to pit this group of people against that group of people. And frankly, I believe that's un-Minnesotan. And it's time to create an economy and strengthen an economy where all Minnesotans can be successful.